the real demonstration innovative schools in the Boston Public Schools about 18 years ago now. And it's really been, just a really wonderful model for what we should be thinking about today and what we should be defending the early years all about. But Geraldine takes a lot of her time as well to be the administrator and, lead with us in defending the early years. And I'm just thrilled that she's here with us today as well. Nancy and I were so concerned about what we were hearing the teachers we have been training for many years say to us about their experiences in classrooms, the mandates they were hearing, they were being imposed on them. We knew what the mandates were, but when teachers were talking to us more and more about the daily realities of what they had to do, how they saw it affecting children, and how inappropriate it was, and how they could tell us about it from the sense of language we had worked with them on for many years as their trainers. I've been working at Wheelock for over 25 years, 30 years at that point, and Nancy had been teaching at Wesley for almost as long, Wesley College and now University, that we really felt like we wanted to work with other leaders in the field to try to create a voice for what we all know is appropriate practice and get resources for all of you to help you defend the early years in your work and be able to speak up as you were getting mandates that you felt were a problem and not good for children as well. So we began collecting stories, doing polls, and then we had 3 wonderful colleagues kind of work with us to create papers that have been widely distributed, gotten a lot of media coverage, and I'll introduce them in a minute. But to tell you the plan for today, they're each going to present their papers, talking about the 3 big issues that they have focused on, talk about advice for dealing with the situation in their areas, ways we're working on it. And then we will talk about that together. And then there'll be a long Q&A time, hopefully. That's the plan, so that we really can work with you, because that's how we keep learning for what we can be doing and what we should be doing to help you. At the end, I'm going to tell you about a meeting tomorrow night. Each year at NAUSC on Friday evening, 6 o'clock this time, we're having a meeting, an organizing meeting that you are all invited to. There's flyers for it in the back, and you'll hear an announcement at the end of the talk, to really hear what you want us to do this year. What kinds of papers would be helpful? What kinds of activism would be helpful? How can we all work together to deal with it? And we have a special speaker who will be here to work with us on it, work with us all on it, who I'll introduce at the end as well. But we really want this to be a session for us to share and work together based on the information that our wonderful expert panelists will be sharing, who are Joan Almon, who is, she was a Waldorf teacher for many, many, many years, but then in 1999, she helped co-found the Alliance for Childhood, which has worked and continues to work to restore play throughout childhood. And she's written many documents which many of us use to kind of help us advocate for play, and really creates the arguments we need to help strengthen the case through the work that she's done with teachers and professionals in the field. One of the ones that's the best known and most relevant today is Crisis in the Kindergarten, Why Children Need to Play in School. And that's available online. Our second speaker is going to be Constance Kamey, who's a professor of early childhood education at the University of Alabama in Birmingham. She's been around for a long time. I've used her books in my teaching for a very long time, because I've been around for a long time too. And she worked with Piaget in Geneva for 15 years on a half-time basis, and spent the other half of her time in the U.S. working with classroom teachers to implement Piagetian ideas with children. And she's the author of several books, including Piaget's that have to do with Piaget's theory, including Young Children Reinvent Arithmetic. It's very relevant for what you'll be talking about today. And then we will end with Lillian Katz, who is a professor emerita at the University of Illinois, where she has been for 46 years. She beats me by just a couple. She was a parent cooperative nursery school teacher in California first for 5 years, but she's lectured, and I couldn't believe this one, since in all 50 states. 50 states. Lillian is the mother of 3, and she says, of 3 glorious little ones. And she's the grandmother of 6 almost more glorious little ones. And she was born in London, but came to the U.S. Almost more than a half century. She's been a U.S. citizen for over half a century, and clearly has been, on field with us for all that time, and clearly made many important contributions. So they are the kinds of leaders and really important people in the field that we're hoping to give you the information that will help you do the kinds of advocacy that we hope you will all be able to take back into your settings and work with us as you go along in your work. So we will start right now with Joan.
It's a pleasure to be with you all this afternoon, and I'm just going to dive right into our topic. Common Core and its impact on children is kind of how I'm thinking of this presentation. So just a little background that most of you know is that when Common Core was first conceived of a few years ago, the idea was, what can we do to get 12th graders ready for the workplace or for higher education? That's a very important question. Where they took that question and then in trying to answer it, stepped it down through the grades and into kindergarten. And we in the Alliance for Childhood felt strongly that kindergarten did not belong in that lineup. That when you're talking about kindergarten and even the lower grades, but especially kindergarten, you need to start from a developmental base and work up. Well, we lost that battle. We could not get kindergarten removed from Common Core, though we tried hard to do so. So it's there. We also noted that in the large number of people who worked on Common Core, none of them were early childhood experts. So the kindergarten standards were essentially written by people who were higher up in education. They seem to ignore the fact that in any typical class, you have at least a 1-year age span and even a wider developmental span. But nonetheless, by the end of kindergarten, for instance, everyone is more or less supposed to be at the same level. And the particular standard that concerned us the most in the Alliance was the reading standard, which calls for children at the end of kindergarten to read emergent reader texts with purpose and understanding. And that sort of unspoken goal had been around for a while in this country. We could talk history about it, but it was around, but it was never really carved into concrete. And the Common Core standards more or less carved it into concrete. There's debate about exactly what it means, but in most cases that we're hearing about, teachers and school leaders are assuming it means children really need to read these basic books at the end of kindergarten. There's a lot of Common Core literacy standards that use words like, they have a standard to meet with prompting and support, meaning the teachers help the children. This reading standard does not say with prompting and support. So that just kind of underscores the fact that children are supposed to be able to basically read on their own. Not advanced literature, but any literature at this age can be a great challenge for some children. Easy for some. I've known 3-year-olds who read beautifully. I've known lots of 5-year-olds who just didn't yet have a serious clue about reading, but became very fine readers, 1st grade, 2nd grade, or 3rd grade. What we learned in looking into this is that there is no concrete evidence that shows that if you start reading in kindergarten or even younger, those children will do better in reading by 3rd or 4th grade than children who start in 1st grade, where we used to start. There's short-term gains, yes, but there are no long-term gains. And yet we're spending a lot of money and a lot of time on early reading, early literacy, print literacy in general, in preschool and kindergarten, without a strong evidence base that this actually helps. We do have studies that show that a play-based approach, rather than a didactic approach, is much stronger in the long run for children. So for instance, everyone knows about the Perry Preschool study that showed that lower income children who were in preschools did better into adulthood than those who were not. What most people don't realize is Perry Preschool was a high-scope play-based program. At the same time that they did it in the late 60s, they did a curriculum comparison study where they took about 68 children and arbitrarily assigned them to a high-scope play-based program, a traditional nursery that was play-based, and an instructional program that used scripted work. So these were 3 or 4-year-olds. At the end of year 1, they found that all 3 programs had the same gains, that there were significant gains, but they were the same whether children were in a play-based program or a didactic one. But that was at the end of year 1. They followed these youngsters up through age 23, and by 23 it was apparent that there were significant differences. That for children who were in the 2 play-based programs more or less came out the same, but the ones from the instructional program were quite different. And I want to just give you 2 of the statistics that they came up with. They looked at school records to see how many children were assigned to special education classes, and in particular special ed for behavioral difficulties. They found that the children who were in the instructional preschool, 47% of them needed to have special ed classes, compared to only 6% of children who'd been in the play-based program. And they also looked at data from police arrests records and looked at felony arrests and found that 34% of the ones from the instructional program had been arrested for a felony compared to 9% of those who were in a play-based program. So yes to universal pre-K, yes to the fact that we want children to have a preschool education. I was a preschool kindergarten teacher for a long time. But not all programs are the same. They have a very significant difference in the outcomes for children. And unfortunately, what we tend to follow these days is more of the didactic instruction. And it's going to, unfortunately, have really serious effects on a lot of children. And I would say especially on children from low-income homes, who are the children that we're most concerned about helping to catch up, but we are approaching them in exactly the wrong way. That's the essence of the report that we wrote on reading instruction in kindergarten. One other piece of evidence that I have found very helpful over the years is that in Germany in the 1970s, the country also wanted instruction-based, what they call cognitively oriented kindergartens rather than play-based experiential ones. And most of the kindergartens in Germany switched over to being cognitively oriented. And then some professors did a study of 50 classes that were cognitively oriented and 50 that were still play-based. And they followed those youngsters up to about through 4th grade. It was about 1,000 children on each side. And they had 17 different measures. And the children from the play-based kindergartens did better on all 17 measures than the ones from the cognitively oriented classrooms. And it was so convincing that Germany switched back to play-based learning, which they still have in their kindergartens today. We've never really honored the studies we have, nor furthered that approach. So we're kind of in a bind, and especially the children are in a bind. And what we really desperately need are appropriate guidelines for kindergarten education. In literacy and math and other areas, but I'm just talking about the literacy, and Constance Kemi will speak about math. What are appropriate guidelines for kindergarten? What I saw with the children I worked with is that those that had strong foundation in oral language tended to do much better with print language than those that were not very good with oral language. And it didn't have to be English, and it didn't even have to be, even children who were hearing impaired, if they were very communicative and could take in language and express themselves, that was great. Children who have a hard time really taking in language or expressing themselves will have a harder time with print literacy. So storytelling, verses, songs, all the ways that we bring oral language to children as well as conversation really enriches that, the child's capacity. Bank Street came out with a lovely document some years back now on its guidelines for what kindergarten children can normally do with print literacy. And they said things like, in kindergarten, some children will recognize some letters, but they may not recognize all letters. When they write, they typically do it with uppercase letters. But Common Core calls for kindergarten children to know all the alphabet, upper and lower case. So right away, you get this discrepancy between what children typically do as 5-year-olds and what they're now expected to do. And a study from the University of Virginia showed that more time is now spent on literacy in kindergarten than on math, science, social studies, and various arts all combined. So we're putting a huge emphasis on literacy early on in hopes that it will pay off. But if you look at the NAEP scores, it's often called the nation's report card that's given to about 175,000 fourth graders, and again, 8th graders, 12th graders, what you will see over a 20-year period is practically a flat line. You'll find this on the NAEP website, naep.gov. It's a governmental program. There have been little ups and little downs and so on, but the graph for 20 years is astonishingly flat. So we've not really made significant progress in reading. And it would be just so wonderful if we could just admit that, and say, well, we got off on the wrong track. The country that has said we're on the wrong track is China, which is working so hard at the moment to bring play-based experiential learning into its preschools and kindergartens. It's astonishing how many people are being invited over to present to teachers in that. And I was over there this summer, and people are hungry. I will tell you, it was one of the most dynamic teaching experiences that I've had with adults. It was just wonderful. Okay, I think that's what I want to say, and then you'll ask more questions after. Thank you so much.